Hello and welcome to Dixon Cox, where we go through the week's news with cutting political insights combined with piss taking. It is, of course, me, Nick Dixon, and Paul Cox. How you doing, Paul?
Hello, Nick. I'm okay. It's another day on planet Earth. Mental.
Absolutely mental, mate. You can tell my intro wasn't planned at all there. Um,
I'm always waiting. There's always a surprise in your intro,
yeah, it
and
was last week.
there was last week. Yeah, and I just wait. I think, what's he going to say now?
What's he
What's he
gonna
going to
say
say?
now? You never know. He's a mad lad. Um, well, this week we have loads of stories to get through, Paul. So I thought we'd just start cracking through them. We've got the Lucy Connolly story. We've got Trump tariffs. Me and Paul are going to explain economics to you within just in minutes. We've got BBC talking about people reverting to Islam, which has surprised a lot of people. We've got prisoners who are forming Islamist gangs that have to be separated from everyone else. We may get onto that. We may get onto the pro-life woman who the US has taken an interest in because of our authoritarian laws. Then we got peak woke, loads of peak wokes. Joan of Arc was non-binary apparently, and we've got Ed Davey watch, of course. Some of that will be in the paid section, but go to nickdixon.net for that and cough up. Just kidding. I know it's a tough economy. Only pay if you want
Gives
to.
you fucking money.
I know you can have the free stuff. People feel like they have to comment. I'm not going to pay. That's fine. No need to comment. So nickdixon.net for all that, and Paul is at Paul Cox Comedy. Let's crack on and do this story of Lucy Connolly. So Alison Pearson, our friend, wrote a great piece on this in the Telegraph, long piece. And she said, I heard the full story of the woman jailed for 2 years for a tweet. Her injustice shames Britain, which it really does. If you haven't followed this story, of course, she put out a tweet during Southport, and no one's saying it was a well advised tweet. She said, mass deportation now, set fire to all the effing hotels full of the B studs. For all I care, while you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it. She posted that at 8:30 p.m. She went out with the German pointer dog that they have called Harley. A lot of detail here. We don't necessarily need the dog's name on this podcast, but there it is. Anyway, it was out for about 4 hours. She went, tell you what, I was very angry there. I'll take that tweet down, which she did. But that wasn't enough. And some context is they lost their firstborn aged 19 months as a result of atrocious failures in NHS care, to quote Alison here. So, obviously she was triggered by children being killed. I mean, we're all triggered by children being killed, but particularly perhaps she was extra triggered and just disgusted by it. So she put out that tweet. And she is the wife of a Conservative councillor who is currently quite ill as well. But she's not allowed to see him because they put her in prison for, I believe, 31 months. Really shocking when you compare to all the light sentences we see. Yeah, 31-month sentence, no bail. She was advised not to plead guilty of distributing material with the intention of stirring up racial hatred, which wasn't her intention, but she got this bad advice. Many people had that advice, whereas the people who pleaded not guilty did better, but they were told, oh, don't do that because it'll take too long and it's better just to plead guilty and get it over with. Terrible advice. But this was what the state was in the interest, was trying to do over Southport. One shocking part, so it's just quite awkward to have my paper here with all my stuff. One shocking part was the Police and Crown Prosecution Service released a statement saying that Lucy told officers she did not like immigrants and claimed that children were not safe from them. But Lucy hadn't said that. What she said in her long interview with the police was, I'm well aware that we need immigrants. I'm well aware that if I go to the hospital, there are immigrants working there and the hospital wouldn't function without them. I'm also well aware of the difference between legal immigrants and illegal immigrants, and they are not checked, nor is what they might have whether they might have done any crimes in their country of origin. So, and she says it's a national security issue and they're a danger to children. Sentiments which are shared by millions of British people, Alison adds. Well, indeed. So why were the police and Crown Prosecution Service misrepresenting her? Why was her bail refused? Why was her sentence so long? These are all big questions. The follow-up piece to this was in the Sunday Telegraph, and this is Mother Jail for Southport Expo should be freed, says former Prime Minister. So Suella Braverman and Liz Truss and Bob Blackman of the 1922 committee have all criticised this. And Suella Braverman says that it was completely wrong. Lucy Connolly is a victim of a politicised two-tier justice system in Starmer's Britain. She should not be in prison. Yes, her comments were crass, tasteless, and vile, and I disagree with them. Lucy deleted them quickly and apologised for her error of judgment. That is why the sentence of 31 months custody for her first-time offence seems excessive. She has deliberately been made an example of to intimidate others into silence. Orwell was out by 40 years. Otherwise, he was spot on. Liz Truss, Lucy Connolly should be released immediately and reunited with her family. The severity of her sentence is completely unjustifiable and a shocking example of two-tier justice, which now prevails in Britain. Sorry, these are so long, Paul. One more thing. Bob Blackman, chairman of 1922 committee, and he's still very much in place in the Tories. So even he says the question of why is she still being kept in prison when violent prisoners are being released? I think she was given poor legal advice to plead guilty in the first place. It seems inhumane to keep someone in prison and away from their kids. She should be given compassionate leave at least, which she's not even going yet. Why are we releasing, when we were releasing all sorts of violent offenders early, why aren't we releasing someone who made a mistake? I mean, yeah, Liam Matthews stabbed someone to death on the day he was released. So there's the context. It should make anyone furious. I mean, and what's interesting to me about those comments from Suella Braverman, Liz Truss, and Bob Blackman is that these are mainstream politicians. I mean, Truss has gone a little bit sort of like on the podcast circuit. She's post her time in high office, so she's kind of wiling out a bit. She's balling. She's sort of saying which one. Suella Braverman's still very much in their system. So is Bob Blackman. So for them to say it's quite significant, and especially when we live in a context where we've grown up with any accusation of racism is the worst possible thing. It's the original sin. Whereas now people are waking up to, hang on, maybe, just maybe, some things are worse than an edgy tweet, even if it did have a sort of racial element, because it was just a tweet, and that's different from violent crimes. And look at what the actual person did that she's complaining about. They murdered children. So maybe there are things worse than racism. But we've existed in a context where people think actually racism is worse than the torture and rape of children, as we saw in the grooming gangs, because people said, okay, that's bad, but I don't want to get called racist. So is this like a slight shifting of like, okay, we recognize the tweet's not ideal, but tell you what, there's a lot of worse things, and she should be released. Paul.
Wow. So where to begin? The first thing that stood out to me actually is we're all triggered by the death of children, and that's true. And she was, and we all were. However, I think the biggest trigger actually wasn't necessarily the death of children. It was the death of children by a certain type of person, which we've imported, and the fact that this continues to happen and it's ignored by the establishment and brushed under the carpet. The anger, the trigger and the anger comes from the, oh no, here we go again. It's happened again. Nobody's going to talk honestly about this. And we saw that throughout the whole thing, to the extent that the focus, if we talk about Southport now, is on the people that were arrested, more so than the perpetrator of the most abhorrent crime you can imagine. He does not get 10% of the mention. 90% of the mention is all about people like Lucy Connolly. And Lucy Connolly wrote something that I wouldn't write. I'm sure you wouldn't write either, Nick, on a public platform like that. And, you know, so what? Okay. In a moment of passion, she wrote that down. A few hours later, took it off. And it was very misguided of her to do so. However, at worst, that's a slap on the wrist and a fine, a suspended sentence, maybe probation, community service. At worst, there's no 31 months in prison. That does not feature at all. The only way that can happen is if someone like Keir Starmer is in charge and wants to make an example. So make no doubt about it, Lucy Connolly has been made an example of. She's been made an example of to terrify the living daylights out of anyone else who would dare to say such a thing. And it's not just what she said, it's the sentiment behind it. Because what Keir Starmer and his like are trying to protect is the overwhelming surge of immigration, legal and otherwise, into our country to prop up their schemes. They don't want the public at large to be so unsettled by something like Southport, because if you start shining a light on how that happened, you then see all sorts of other things, as we saw, and it just gets pushed under the carpet. So every time it happens, every time we see a terrorist attack in Germany, France, across Europe, USA, in the UK, and 8 times out of 10, it's the same type of perpetrator, we are told not to talk about it. Don't speculate. This doesn't happen. You're over-exaggerating it. And this is what people are getting angry about, because they're being gaslit to death. Lucy Connolly did something wrong. Lucy Connolly spoke her mind in an emotional state and probably deserved a low-level form of punishment as a result. What I mean by that is all the things I've said, a fine at max. You know, the example you can make of someone like Lucy is just to bring that out and say that's just not acceptable. We have these problems, but we shouldn't talk about it in this way, and we shouldn't, we shouldn't say that. I was going to use the word incite. She didn't incite from my, and the thing that really strikes me about this is usually when I go onto Twitter and I see the debate between the right and the left, I can actually see both sides of the argument, but still believe that maybe in most cases the centre right side of the argument is correct. On this, I don't understand the left side on this whatsoever. There are people genuinely on the left side of this argument that say this is proportionate. 31 months in prison, not able to see your daughter. Obviously, we've heard that her first child died as a result of NHS incompetence. I'd like just to thank Alison Pearson, actually. Alison Pearson, not just because you retweeted my tweet, and I've met Alison and I've got a lot of time and respect for her, because Alison Pearson seems to be one of the few journalists that isn't afraid to tackle this head on. And I know that there are plenty of other people who would, but I mean mainstream journalists who have had the police turn up at their door and are still not going to shy away from it. It started a bit of a snowball effect over the weekend, but I don't think it will change anything. People like Keir Starmer are not changed by people's opinion. They don't believe in people's opinion. They believe that people are lower than them. They believe in the people being plebs. They believe that the people need to be controlled. This is all about control. And it's outrageous. It's absolutely... I'm actually, on this one in particular, ashamed to live in a country that this has happened in. Yeah. All the values, all the things that we care deeply about, our history, our democracy, our justice system, which the rest of the world has been based on to some degree, thrown under the bus since July of 2024 by people like Keir Starmer.
Yeah, and on that point, Starmer, yes, his response was disgusting. I've never forgotten it. It went on about far-right thugs and all that. I actually got in trouble. I was told to repeatedly call them far-right, the Southwark riots, and I refused to do it. They were not far right. You know, the media can always produce that one guy with the Nazi tattoos, and you go, okay, yeah, maybe that guy. But mostly they weren't. They were just concerned people like Lucy Connley, normal people with very reasonable concerns who have been pushed to the end of their tether by our anarcho-tyranny government that prioritizes foreign criminals over innocent UK citizens. And people have said, the kind of pundit class or the political class to some degree, that Starmer handled that well. So, he seems to have handled that well, and like his poll results are good for Southwark. I mean, I think that's bollocks, basically. I think maybe you've got a poll that says that, but further down the line, that the sense of disgust that is created deep in the belly of England and Britain, that's not going away. That's getting, the anger's building up more and more. And so the idea that he handled it well, because he got released a load of violent criminals and chucked a load of Facebook grannies in there. No, he didn't handle it well. And just on the people justifying it, luckily I haven't seen that because it would make me very angry. I haven't seen much of it. What I've seen, if we get onto the story later of the pro-life campaign, I've seen loads of people reply to that and say, she broke the law. She broke the law. It's like, yeah, she broke the buffer zone law made up 10 minutes ago by wankers. Like, she broke the law. It's like, oh yeah, these are the people like who think you should patrol the beaches during COVID because someone's eating an ice cream. It's like, yeah, we saw all you scum during COVID. We know you people. You broke the law. It's like, yeah, okay. Switch your fucking brain on. Those people make me so angry because they're like,
yeah,
it's more like switch your conscience on, because they just, just any law is it then? Any law is just fine, is it? It's like, no, even Lord Sumption says we don't have a moral obligation to follow unjust laws. I think he knows a bit more about the law than you fucking replying pricks on Twitter. Anyway, I'll get comments about the swearing there.
Visceral anger there from Dixon.
I just seen they make me so angry. She broke the law. It's like, yeah, oh really? That's your worldview, is it? Just that fucking simple. And Andrew Doyle has a mega thread here. Our friend Andrew. UK police are arresting over 12,000 each year for offensive speech. Offensive inverted commas. That's over 30 arrests per day So I thought I'd compile a list of UK citizens who've been visited, investigated, or arrested by police for speech crime. The list is by no means comprehensive, but it is a massive list. I mean, you've got Harry Miller, you've got Helen Jones, so many cases. Kelly J. Keane being untoward about pedos. I don't know if we can say the word on YouTube, but I've said some of it there. Famously, Count Dankula. Paul Gascoigne I'd forgotten about for a joke he made. Obviously, the WhatsApp one we covered last week. Maxie Allen, Rosalind Levine. So many. Joseph Kelly. It was a joke. Lucy Connolly we just mentioned. Jamie Michael. Leo Kurz talks about a lot. Posted a video online, criticized legal migration, called for peaceful protest, was arrested and charged, later found not guilty in court. Former Royal Marine. Darren Brady, I remember that one. The progress flag put into a swastika was a satirical thing. It just goes on and on and on. And they some of them are so, I mean, they're all absurd. And it goes on and on. You're like, what? Alison Pearson's in there. You go, what are we doing, man? It's so
Well,
pathetic.
it's punitive headmaster type politics and justice now. As soon as justice gets involved in politics, it's game over. It's game over. We've seen it creeping in over the last 10 years. But no way should anyone, I don't care what side of the aisle you're on in terms of politics, should you be able to persuade someone that your ideology means that the person that disagrees with you is a criminal. And look, no one, I don't think I've ever heard anyone say, certainly publicly, that what Lucy Connolly said was smart. And it is offensive. Of course it's offensive. She's talking about burning down a hotel with living human beings in it. But she's doing it from a position of anger, and she's entitled to have that opinion. That opinion is not the worst opinion you'll hear. I mean, read The Guardian. Look at the safe opinions, the opinions that are allowed. Read that. I mean, that includes chopping off the genitals of small boys and girls. That's okay. Okay, genuinely, they want to encourage that. Whereas you go the other way and you say, look, these people are causing us so much trouble. I wish they were gone. I wish they were gone. I'm scared to death. That's what that tweet says. I am scared. I am so frightened and no one is coming to protect us. Our own government do not come to protect us. The police are ideologically opposed to the public as a whole, and they're not going to protect us either. So the people are fearful. That's where this is coming from. She doesn't genuinely mean that's what she exactly wants. She means she is scared. Now, everyone out there, I don't care what political persuasion you are, when you've been scared, when you've been fearful of something and you've been angry as a result, you have said things you don't mean to your partner, to your children, to your friends, to your family, to strangers outside the car window. And you do it from a place of fear, and you can be forgiven for it because we are humans. When you start legislating against human behaviour, we are in a whole world of pain. Because who makes that decision? And if it's Keir fucking Starmer, then we are in big trouble. I wouldn't want it to be anyone. You imagine if it had been Boris Johnson. Now, Boris wouldn't do this. I don't want to be judged by Boris's moral standard in the same way I don't want to be judged by Keir Starmer's moral standard. That's why the political system has to stand alone. That's why there has to be freedom of speech. Now, if she kept doing it, if that was the 28th tweet in a month, then yeah, we've got a problem. We should start to look at it. But look at the other people that are radicalised, that are able to talk all in mosques or preach on the streets or talk on social media about the things that they want to do to other types of people. They're not in prison for 31 months. So I'm sorry, Lucy Connolly's been made an example of, a very unfair example. A slap on the wrist would have done it, and she should be able to see her daughter and her husband. End of chat.
Yeah, okay. I'm almost wondering if we should go to some of these other stories that are more thematically linked, but I think the other massive story in the world is the Trump tariffs thing, so maybe we should do that second so that the YouTube people get the benefit of our economic knowledge. Paul. So this is a story where everyone knows my one weakness is economics. It's my only weakness. God in his infinite wisdom gave my brother the economic ability and me the English. I did English, he did economics. Now, I could have asked my brother about the tariffs, but I haven't because he has a severe case of Trump derangement syndrome, and I just can't bear the rant that will come.
It's just not worth it.
You'll get like a long rant, and then you might get some economics at the end. And if I can get him on the economics, he's brilliant. But I can't face the rant. So I've just been trying to listen to as many sources as I can, from the New Statesman to Trump's former advisor Robert Lighthizer, and try to just get every perspective I can. I'm still not sure where I stand. I haven't got a firm view because it's just beyond my pay grade. But so just to recap, Trump got out his big beautiful chart of tariffs, and he loves a massive chart. Let's be honest with Trump; he loves a sort of
Oh, mate.
comedically sized chart. And one of them saved his life famously. He's like, "That chart, what a great chart, saved my life. You could say it saved my life." When he tilted his head. So he got a big chart out with all the tariffs, just pointing at them. We'll do 10%. It's his favorite thing in the world. He's been building up to this for decades. He's had a bee in his bonnet about tariffs since decades ago on 90s TV when he had a strong New York accent. And he's like, China is kicking the hell out of us. Like, he's been saying this for decades. What his level of understanding about tariffs is, no one quite knows. Whether he just sees it as sort of like you're messing with us in a deal. But there's Trump's view of it, and then there's the advisor's view. So advisors like Lighthizer, I've watched several interviews with him. He thinks that this is the only thing you can do to win this trade war with China. China's been winning a trade war for decades that people didn't even know they were in. Some people think China's already just won on manufacturing and it's over. This is the US's attempt, is my understanding, to at least avoid the iceberg of China's domination. Well, at least they're trying to do something, if in that context, if you believe that. And he sees it as the only way to do that. Now, the ins and outs of whether it actually will do that is another question. He sees it as trying to achieve trade balance, and he says, which some people think is not even doesn't even mean anything anyway. But in his view, he's saying we don't have free trade because, for example, in the Europe and Britain, we won't take chlorinated chicken where they wash it at the end to check for salmonella, and that's what the US does. So that's a barrier to trade. You could add environmental barriers. So he says there are all these regulations that are trade barriers. So you're never going to have free trade. And he says you're never going to have fair trade. But what you can have is trade balance. And he says the tariffs are just one small part of it. The tariffs are being seen as the be-all, end-all. He sees them as one small part of balancing trade and attempting to take on China. I've heard another view that this is the US trying to force other countries to sell their reserves of dollars, lower the value of the dollar, and make exports more competitive. That's another view I've heard. Whether Trump sees it like that, I don't know. Academic Agent was making the case that people like Trump just see the word deficit as bad because it sounds bad, whereas it doesn't mean something bad. Trade deficit. So, and that he sees the dollar being weak as bad because it sounds bad, whereas of course it might not be bad. So things like that. The other side just says that Trump's an idiot. He's destroying the world. He's causing a trade war. It will make things more expensive for Americans. Americans will be poorer on the ground. They won't like that. Obviously, China's retaliated with the 34% to match the US's 34%. We just heard today that Ursula von der Leyen offered 0% on certain things, but Trump's already not accepted it. Let me just get the thing. They offered a removal of all industrial tariffs, and they offered a 0 for 0 tariff scheme. But Trump has already been quoted as saying, I've listened to the video, he goes, they say, is that enough? He goes, absolutely not. And he just goes on to say that the EU's been created to destroy America and American trade. That's what it was there for. So it seems like you've got multiple things going on. You've got the war with China, which is mainly what it's about. But then you've got, on the side of that, Trump also hating the EU and multiple other things. And of course, you've got the crashing stock market, which doesn't affect millennials like me because we've never had stocks, but it affects boomers like Leo and other friends of mine who are complaining about the stocks. That's the short-term pain. Trump said the operation was a success. The patient didn't die. He's saying it's not a big deal. There's also been talk of Trump pausing the tariffs, which would mean it is all just negotiating stuff and it isn't serious. I don't know. Any take, Paul? I'm baffled. There's too much going on.
Well, you say. I mean, that was a nice synopsis of what's going on, Nick. There's a couple of things going on there. I think one thing we were talking about China and the trade war. One thing that's been quite apparent for a long time, maybe 2 decades now at least, is huge corporations within the US and UK and the EU and places like that have been very happy to sell as much to foreign investors as possible. Okay, I can remember having an extension built on one of my houses, on a house I lived in back in 2006. And the builder was a friend of mine, and he was talking to me about how he'd seen timber prices rise at that point because all the timber that was being produced was being bought up for an inflated price by China. They were more than happy to pay for whatever price it was to take all the timber production in one direction because they knew that long term that strategy would work out because they would have the raw materials, and the US and the EU and the UK at the time wouldn't have so, and it obviously affected our markets. Now that's at a low level when you go to B&Q or a timber merchants, but if you've got a huge big corporate that is manufacturing in the US, but it happily takes billions and billions of dollars of investment from foreign investors, and it takes the production out and then sells it back in, well, then you can understand what someone like Donald Trump is trying to do. He's trying to stop that as much as possible. He's saying, you are a US-based company, big corporate. We want you to produce, manufacture here. We want you to give jobs to the US. That's what his mandate is, make America great again. It's not, make the world great again. So he's trying to bring that back in. And to some degree, this could really work and this could really do it. Because the solution to a lot of those problems is manufacture it in the US, sell in the US, give US people jobs. The devaluing of the dollar, I've read several things on this that seem to. I mean, I could be just, I'm not sure which side they were on, but devaluing the dollar can work for the US as well. The dollar's at such a high that it makes it difficult to do trade anyway. If you've got a lower value dollar, then you're more likely to do more work, more trade with the US. But of course, the key thing here is China and the trade war and the EU. I've found it. I don't know about you, Nick, but I found the fact that the EU have got a 20% tariff and the UK have got a 10% tariff absolutely delicious. It really did, for the first time, answer the question: name one Brexit benefit. There you go. We got half the tariffs from the US because we left the EU. No ifs, no buts, no James O'Brien. Doesn't matter what you think or say. That's exactly what happened there. Tough tits. Okay. Now, I'm not saying it's brilliant. I'm not saying this is wonderful, but we've now got that. Okay. And I didn't even vote Brexit. I'm a big Brexit supporter now, but in 2016, I didn't vote Brexit. I mean, I accepted the vote immediately and was surprised as many people was. So I never became a Remainer or a Ramona, and I absolutely detest anyone who did because, get over it. We need to play more. This is the problem with giving everybody a medal in sports now, is when they lose, they don't realise they lost and they've never learned how to lose. And it's the biggest thing you learn in any competition is how to lose well. And we saw from 2016 onwards, many, many, many people didn't know how to lose well. But with these tariffs, it is going to cause a huge disruption. I don't know quite what his game is in terms of does he want that disruption? But what it will do is it breaks down this team world, to quote a Schafarian quote, globalization. It breaks it down. It makes the WEF much less powerful because it creates more isolationism. So it means that someone like the US can bring everything back in, make the US great again, and then build its power up from inside out again. It was losing control of that, and it still might. It might not be enough. I don't know enough about economics to know whether it will be, but there is a relatively high probability, if it's greater than 50%, then it is relatively high, that this could work. And if it does, it will only work in Trump's favour. It won't work against him. However, it will throw the rest of the world in turmoil. And when you've got van der Leyen and Keir Starmer and people like that, who, by the way, Keir Starmer coming out and saying it looks like globalisation has failed and sort of admitting to that, I don't believe a word of it. His whole political principle, he's the man from Davos. He's the Davos man.
Let's do that separately at the end, but go on.
Yeah, so the point of that is I don't believe a word of it, okay? They see this as a huge shock. One thing I do agree with is to keep calm. He's saying keep calm on this, and rightly so. This is the whole point. You now negotiate. You don't call Trump a dickhead and say he's complete wanker, we don't like any of this, and we're going to retaliate. China can do that. China can do that. The EU can't. The UK can't. Belize can't. Mexico can't. They need to negotiate. So this is just, if it's brinkmanship, then it's going to work, I think.
All right, just a few things. I mean, one accusation is that supply chains are now far too complex to even achieve this autarky that people talk about, self-sufficiency, and we're just too globalized. One example is US cars, which take parts from Mexico. But there's loads of examples of that, supply chains. But there is a national security aspect, which Lighthouse has talked about, many people have talked about, whereby, for example, China supplying things that you need for military equipment or pharmaceuticals and medicines can't last long term because you can't be in a trade war against people who can shut off your military equipment and medical supplies. So
Yeah.
that makes sense. There is a strong national security element to things like tariffs, which probably anyone would agree makes sense. It's the economic element as a pure trading tool that people don't agree with, or many people don't. And whether it is about the US maintaining dominance or giving up dominance, no one seems to agree about either. Because we've talked about this in the past. Rubio talking about the multipolar world. No one can quite decide if Trump's trying to save the empire or is just pissing it away because he's forcing all these alliances now of Asian countries that didn't need to be there. He's forcing Europe and Britain to reconsider what they're doing. And really, is it the end of global America? And is it a retreat? It's not quite clear. Of course, he always was elected on economic nationalism and on the Steve Bannon vision. So it is an attempt to deliver that. Whether it does deliver for American workers, though, and again, people are divided on say actually it won't. William Clouston of the SDP, I noticed, was in favor of the tariffs. Partly makes me think it's ideological. The economics are so complicated; it almost comes down to your ideological persuasion. And the more libertarian people like Peter Schiff, of course, have hammered it, and the more protectionist people like it. But yeah, I mean, on balance, it does seem the tariffs, they don't seem to have a good history, and I can see that most people are against them. I just don't think they work. What Keir Starmer's response you mentioned, this is something we can talk about as well. He replied to this. Well, there was a piece in the Times, Keir Starmer, to admit globalization has failed as tariff war rages, but he had a piece that was more direct than that, and he didn't exactly say globalization has failed. He didn't really say much. So it was Keir
There was
Starmer.
a
The world.
spokesperson for a start, wasn't it, from number 10
Well,
that the
that was
quote
yeah.
came
Then
from?
Starmer
Yeah.
himself wrote this Telegraph piece saying the world as
Yeah,
we knew it
sorry.
has gone. Nobody wins from a trade war. Although they don't write the headlines, but so he said a few things in this, but there was nothing really of value in there to me. Again, it was Starmer. It's just language. You felt, what does this really mean? He says, yeah, he said, keep calm, as you mentioned. That's why on tariff, the immediate priority is to keep calm and fight for the best deal. So we're not going to do the thing of the EU of trying to get into a trade war. We're still trying to get this special free trade deal with America, unique to Britain, which no one's ever seems to have achieved, and it doesn't seem very likely at the moment. So Starmer's trying to be smart about it. Then again, he's talked elsewhere about forming a coalition of the willing, which was this weird word for that Ukraine Zoom call Starmer wanted to have. Now been ported over to this, where it sounds like he might align with the EU more. So he's still on the fence for now. He says all options remain on the table. I'll only strike a deal if it's right for British business and the security of working people. I'll continue to make the case for free and open trade. Um, but I don't. When I read about what he's actually going to do, it's just a justification of all the policies he already has. For example, the the employment bill he suggests is going to somehow help, which all economists agree that employment bill and the OBR agree is not going to do anything good. So I said I've read Starmer's article and there's just nothing there. No real plan for responding to the new economic situation. Laughable claims about securing our energy independence with Ed Miliband and making work pay with stronger employment rights, aka the awful employment bill, which will only damage the economy further. And he talks about security at home, a clear understanding of our national interest. But all that's completely undermined by the levels of legal and illegal migration, the plague of activist judges, and Labour's fundamental hatred of British people and British values, of which the Lucy Connolly case has been a shocking reminder. So I put it much better there than putting it now. When you talk about security, national interest, when you talk about energy independence, I just don't believe any of it. I just don't believe that their actual policies are doing it. What I do see is they had a disastrous budget, they had a follow up disastrous budget, and then Trump's tariffs completely blow that second budget out of the water and make it irrelevant as well. So I just see this government with absolutely no answers. Some of the things he says, ripping up the stifling state bureaucracy that stops us building. Yeah, I mean, fair enough on that, if you can actually do it. The comments all just completely savage Starmer, though, and I don't think he has any answers. What do you think, Paul?
No, he doesn't really, does he? There isn't anybody within that cabinet that will have answers either. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, is. We haven't heard anything from her at all, really. She's the Chancellor. You'd expect her to. Now, I do know anecdotally, locally, Goodwood's near me. Goodwood is the home of motoring in the area. It's also got a Rolls-Royce factory in that area. Rolls-Royce one of its biggest markets is the US, as well as the Middle East and people like that, because they really love, people like the US and the Middle East and China, I'd imagine as well. They really love the prestige cars that the UK, only the UK can really build, like, Rolls Royce and Bentley and Jaguar and stuff like that. Although Jaguar's now been bought by Ford, I think, so it's just a Mondeo. But I should imagine some of the more prestige cars aren't. I don't want to undermine the whole of Jaguar, even though their complete rebranding is absolute wank. Not many trans people's buying Jaguars, I think. It seems to be the market that they're aiming at, though. But it's caused them a bit of an issue because they can't, you set up a business plan, a 5-year business plan, even a 6-month business plan, and someone chucks an extra 10% on and it throws it out because, 10% might be your profit margin on some things. And when it's a lot of money, 10% is a lot of money. But if it's taken away from you. So the urgency really is, although we're keeping calm, is to do a deal with Trump. And I think it's a shame we haven't got a conservative type government, not the Conservatives, but a conservative type government that could appeal to Trump and do a deal quite quickly. No one's ever managed to achieve this magical deal on trade with the US, really, certainly since Brexit, because obviously before that we had no chance until about 1973 or whenever we joined the bloc. But since then, no one's been able to achieve it, largely because the Tories faffed about with Brexit endlessly. So during Trump's first tenure, there was no deal to be done because there was no time to do it. And then obviously Biden came in. Biden has absolutely no interest in the British Isles whatsoever. He is a supporter of things like the IRA. So not great for us. So that was never going to happen. So now is the best chance we got to do a deal. So Starmer is right to keep calm and try and do a deal. And let's see what we can do. If anybody can do a deal with Trump, it probably is Britain and the UK. So let's hope that for all of us that he can, because if we get decent trade outside of the EU with the US, it's a massive win. It really is a massive win. And at 10% at the moment, it's already a win to some degree. I know it's punitive to say so because, I'm thanking the man who's beating us up. But hopefully, we can do a trade deal and it can work in our favour, Nick.
All right. Well, I'm not sure. I mean, you're a bit optimistic there, Paul, but fair enough.
Yeah, I think we have some optimism. Sorry, I didn't want to speak all over you there. Listening to your take on it and all the other takes I've seen, it's like the way I look at it is not necessarily it's an optimistic take. It's like we're in it. It's happening, okay? Last Wednesday, he changed the way trade is done on planet Earth with one chart that wasn't even electronically created. It looked like, they knocked it up on Blue Peter. So it just changed everything. So we're in it. And do you know what? When you're in something like that, you've got to make the most of it. I mean, what else can you do?
We'd love to have that confidence just to wake up one day, I'm going to change global trade and here's my chart. I mean, the ball's on top because a lot of politicians just get in there now to do nothing, don't they? That's been a big accusation. I mean, both Dominic Cummings and Douglas Carswell have talked about our Potemkin charade, which is just these meetings where politicians just read out a script written by their staff. So really, one thing about Trump that is quite fascinating is that he actually does stuff. He doesn't just sit there and wait for his time to be over and do stock tips on the side like Pelosi or all these Biden type people. He just he's like, I tell you, I'm going to just fuck with global trade. How about that? But he has been planning it for decades. As I say, for perhaps different reasons to his economic advisors. All right, we're bashing through the stories quicker today. It's just to keep an exciting pace. We'll see how some people might like us to do more detail, but we'll try in this today because we've got so many stories. I wanted to talk about this one. Back to old Blighty. BBC accused of Islamist propaganda for calling Muslim converts reverts. So this was fascinating. They ran this article, and the term revert was used throughout to revert rather than convert to Islam, suggesting you were always deep down Islamic, but you thought you were a Christian or you thought you were an atheist or something, but you'd gone astray and you wanted to revert to Islam. So the term naturally diminishes all other faiths and no faith. Of course it does. But the BBC used it bizarrely throughout an article. Then they edited it so that just the headline had it, and it had as a quote of the person saying it, which I guess is less offensive. Then that was also taken out as well after they continued to be hammered. And quite mainstream people have really objected to this. Tom Tugendhat is one. He actually has an MA in Islamic studies, I believe. which is quite surprising. But he said calling
And quite
converts.
left of the Tory party as well. Sorry, Nick. It's worth pointing out. I know you mentioned Tom Tiggett. He's quite left, considering he's in the Tory party as well.
Yeah, he's one of the Tory wets, but he says calling converts reverts is ideology, not fact. It's claiming we're all originally Muslim, and those who convert are rediscovering their faith. That's Islamist propaganda and has no place on the BBC. He has a master's in Islamic studies from Cambridge, so he might know something. Mainstream Islam is clear on conversion as a route to salvation in keeping with other faiths. This is not the same. So then you have actually a guy here, Dr. Taj Harjay from, might be the pronunciation, of Oxford Institute for British Islam, says the term should never be used. It's used by Islamic fundamentalists in their propaganda that everyone is born Muslim. It is utter tosh, and the correct term to use is convert. It's concerning that the BBC has chosen to use this divisive term that most Muslims would not use, only extremists and supremacists. So this is fascinating about the BBC when they actually go further. They're so insane. They actually go further than most Muslims would.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, on the back of this strange push to celebrate Eid from Keir Starmer, from the BBC, and from Formula One, from all these companies, very weird, very deliberate push. A lot of people have noticed to push Eid this year. And I think, for only 6% of the population, at least that we know on the census. And, there may also be Hindus and Sikhs and all kinds of other people going, hang on, why is our thing not celebrated? Never mind the majority, the just us schmucks here. And it's really fascinating because you've got this wider trend, of course, of countries like Saudi Arabia becoming more moderate. Meanwhile, we're so extreme. I was joking about it, perhaps in a slightly reckless and dangerous way, saying that in Saudi we'll have people moving to Saudi Arabia, while in Bradford you won't be able to look through a window if you're a woman or draw water from a well, which was a story we covered about the Taliban. But the point is, this is the BBC using very extreme language. It's such a strange choice. And my theory on it was they don't really know what they're doing. They're just like, oh, we've got to say Muslims good now because we want to create harmony. Otherwise, we'll create unrest. So we'll do that. And then they go so far and they overshoot because they don't even understand it. And they're just kind of basically a bunch of poshos just going, oh, do that now. Who knows who's behind it, but they have no clue what they're doing. And my point I made on telly was actually, if you really wanted to encourage people to welcome Islam and so on, you would actually be more moderate and more reasonable, and you wouldn't go all in using language like this. Paul?
Yeah. Very interestingly, the journalist who wrote this, she used the term revert 9 times in the article, the original article, and a couple of times in the tweet that she wrote about the article. So this was not a mistake. This wasn't one attempt at trying to contextualize a sentence and made perhaps an error of judgment. Now, this was a deliberate use of the word revert, which is exactly what, as you described, is the assumption there is that everybody's born Muslim. Some recognize it immediately and others come to the faith later on. Okay. And we are seeing the perpetuation of things like Eid and Muslim celebrations, but at the exact time we're seeing the downplaying and the outright removal of Christian festivals as well. Now, Norwood School and Eastleigh, most people are aware of it. It's not too far from me. They cancelled the Easter celebrations. Now, people here that aren't religious, particularly if they're not Christian, they perhaps see Easter as a time for chocolate eggs and some time off work, and perhaps lesser of a festival than Christmas. It's not. The biggest festival in the Christian calendar is Easter. Jesus came back from the dead, the resurrection of Jesus. There is no bigger celebration of the Christian faith than Easter. To take it out at the same time as you're celebrating Eid tells you the direction of travel. And then for the BBC to allow an article of this type with that use of the word revert, it's a stark reminder that there is a huge ideology at play here. And they might be Muslims, maybe 6% of our population, but the direction of travel is that's where people want us to go. They want us to go in that direction. There's no two ways about it. I'm not suggesting that at this stage in time, the Muslim faith and the Muslim faith festivities are celebrated greater than the Christian ones, but we are seeing a trend.
I'm saying that.
Yeah, okay, but I
But
think if
what's
you
the
try
reason,
to
though? Is it to avoid civil unrest, though, Paul, and try and encourage
yes,
multicultural
of course
harmony?
it is. Absolutely, it's the reason. Well, I'll just very quickly finish that point because you're right, Nick. If you were able to compare the statistics, I'm sure on the BBC there are more programs that celebrate Christmas and Easter than there are Eid.
I see what you
Okay,
mean.
maybe. Okay, so that's all I'm saying at this point in time. But there's a huge increase in it, and it is to avoid tensions. Now, what that tells you is that they see where the tension comes from. It comes from one faith. No one. We're not banning. You know, you wouldn't be banning an Easter celebration if you thought for a minute the Christians were going to kick off. The Christians aren't going to kick off. They're too busy knitting things to go on top of post boxes and raising money for children in the village hall. They're not going to kick off. You do that to the Muslim faith, and there is a sect within the Muslim faith that we call Islamists that will literally kick off and blow up. So we are trying to appease people. We are absolutely trying to appease people. And we're going to cover this in a story in a minute about what's happening in our prison population. A further testament to this problem that we've got, and it goes back to Lucy Connolly as well, because of the religion of the people that were in that hotel. The punishment is exponentially more,
Mm.
exponentially more. It's got not, it's not just because they're immigrants. It's because they're Muslim immigrants, and it's because we know, and Keir Starmer knows, that if you start standing up to these people, you end up with a Batley Grammar School situation. Simple as, all the facts are there, totally demonstrable. Okay, so why don't we deal with the problem? Why don't we say, hey guys, when we've got them in a little round circle saying, can we do some police work this week in your area? Can we also say any chance at all that you could be less blowy uppy and less violent, because it's causing us a massive problem. Okay, look at the Christians over there; they just knitted something to go on top of the post box. Look at the Hindus over there; they're having a lovely old time, and they look at all the lights that they've lit down there. That was wonderful, isn't it? Why don't you boys calm down a fucking bit? Because we have got a huge problem and we're not allowed to talk about it. So could you help us out, please? I'm about to die, by the way, Nick. This is the end of my life, not just my career. It's over for me now. But it drives me mad because we're not focusing in on the problem. When I've said this before, if you look at it from a football supporter's perspective, when in the 80s there was hooliganism around, it was the football supporters that had to change. And they turned in on themselves, made it better, and now we've got the situation where we've got now, where it's just the minutest amount of people are hooligans within football because they control it themselves. And we need to see the same action within the Muslim community.
Well, I was going to say, Paul, we need you as chief of police. I could see it. Just calm it down, lads. I could see you solving a lot of problems. By the way, it does occur to me that I've seen Andrew Tate use the word revert, and so maybe the BBC can make up with Tate because they've got some common ground
Oh,
here.
yeah.
They're always having a pop
Yeah.
at Andrew Tate. Like, hey, they have got the same view on reverting to Islam. You mentioned the Norwood School. Yeah, I did have an extra story I was considering doing, which is Christians protest outside primary school over disgraceful scrapping of Easter service to respect other religions. That's in the Mail. And the criticism here was, it's actually outside people coming in, and actually the locals like the head. They tried to use that over Southport, which turned out to not even be true. And doesn't even matter if it is true because it's a general topic that has bothered a lot of people. But that was part of the piece. But yes, I mean, I thought it was nice to see. I was hoping it was the locals. It was like finally Christians actually standing up, because we saw when it was the teaching of LGBT lessons, and whatever you think to that, Muslim parents got out there and said, no, we're not having this. And it did make a big difference. I mean, so that's what you need to do. If your school is shutting down Easter and no other festival and doing it in the name of inclusivity, which is, of course, absurd, you need to get out there and say no. And as a parent, you say, we're not having that. I'm amazed that headmasters got away with that, headmistress. But anyway, yeah, that was an awful story. But at least they're doing a protest. Um, since you mentioned that other story, let's quickly get to that then. Very much related topic, which is prisoners who refuse to join radical Islamist gangs in jail are being put in segregation units for their own safety. Now, it's nothing new that people gather into groups in prison. And if we ever have civil unrest, you'll probably see, on a massive scale, you'll probably see the country dividing into just groups that, we sort of pretend there's this thin veneer. We pretend that we're all just liberal, interchangeable economic units. But when the shit hits the fan, I think you'll find people stick pretty much to certain groups. That's my prediction. I mean, I'm sure there'll be some wokes trying to join the Islam side, and good luck to them. But in prison, people go into these groups, and the other thing is you've got a lot of Islamists in the groups, or just Muslims in the jails. Sorry, so you create these factions in the jail. I mean, this is not a new. It's not a new thing in jail, and it's not a new thing in this country that you get Muslim groups and warring with other groups in jail. But it seems to have got to just a new level where it's just becoming unmanageable. HMP Franklin in County Durham, officers are keeping people separate from Islamic extremists, the Times reports. And one prison, let me see, it's said to have become so overrun with Islamic gangs that its terrorist separation centers, which were built in a bid to stop terrorists from radicalizing others, have become defunct. So I don't know, they've just basically run out of space. And they're saying that they'd need an entire prisons dedicated to that separation. And not just one prison, but multiple prisons. I mean, presumably that's what they'll have to do. I mean, no one's going to want to do that, though, so perhaps they won't do it. But you just need separate prisons. And Robert Jenrick wrote a long thread about it, which I can't remember exactly the whole gist of it, but it's just how far it's gone, this situation of needing entire segregated prisons, Paul. What did you think?
Yeah. And these segregation areas originally were built to keep Muslim inmates apart so they weren't radicalized within prison. I mean, read into that what you will. And we've talked about the Muslim population being 6%. It's certainly not 6% of that prison. It's much larger than that. And what this, okay, so this looks like a classic Telegraph / Daily Mail type story where chaps like you and I can get all red-faced about it. Oh, what's going on here? But it's a very serious issue. And you said, I think you said Robert Jenrick tweeted a thread about this as well. And within that, he highlighted the fact that child abusers, child killers, pedos are often the most low-ranking prisoners in the prison population, scorned upon, scum, rightly so. Okay, but they are converting to Islam,
right,
to be protected and be within the protection of the Muslim Brotherhood. One example of this is Levi Belfield. Okay. Levi Belfield converted in prison and is now being protected by the Muslim Brotherhood. So he is now not really at as much risk as he would have been in the prison population because he's joined the Muslim Brotherhood. This is astonishing stuff. And what happens within prison like that is a microcosm of what is happening out on the streets, whether we like it or not. It's exactly what's going on. It tells you who the people are that are committing the crimes, how they think, how they behave, and what's likely to be going on outside the prison walls too, Nick.
Yeah, our decline is so bad that our prisons are a mess. Make prisons great again is what I said. I mean, our prisons are now an embarrassment in themselves. I mean, that is shocking that Levi Belfield, I mean, he looks like a right wrong, doesn't he? And yeah, just joining the Muslim Brotherhood to... Because that's how it works. That's how the
along
mafia's
with
always
other people.
Huh?
He killed Millie Dale. A lot of people might remember this. On-Thames, I think
horrific.
it was. He's Millie Dale's murderer. And very sadistic child killer.
Ugh. I'm just looking at the picture on Jenrick's thread. That's why I said, you know, when you can see, when you look at criminals and you're not surprised at how many of them look. He's one of those type people.
He's a big man. And I think his girlfriend at the time was quite suspicious of his type of behaviour. And he was very abusive towards her. I mean, this is not a nice guy, okay? He's not converting to Muslim because he's seen the light. He's converted to become a Muslim because he can be protected by these gangs. And do you know what? Oh, whatever. You can see it. But the fact that they are happy to protect Levi Belfield tells me something else about them as well. Because he's not going to be protected by the wider, particularly the white population. People like Levi Belfield normally have to be kept apart for their own safety.
For obvious reasons, yeah. And Matthew Stadlin, who's blocked me, but I can still, with the new algorithm, see his brilliant tweets, replies to Jenrick saying, if there's any truth to any of this, it obviously needs sorting. How many jails are affected according to your research? If there's any truth to it, Matthew. Everyone knows it's been happening for years and years and years. These people, they just live in a total fantasy world. But then some people have said, well, what about the Tories being in for 14 years? That will always be there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean,
but at least Jenrick's trying to do something. I'm not that I'm pro-Tory. But I am known to be a bit pro-Jenrick because I think he's honestly the most right-wing politician we have outside of sort of obscure parties. He's to the right of Farage and anyone in Reform except Rupert Lowe, who they've binned. So, am I wrong on that?
No, not if you're a supporter of right wing philosophy. Absolutely not. And the Tory Party, which traditionally was on the right of politics, small government, less taxes, etc., etc., capitalism.
Well,
All
even
these things we enjoy, and we do enjoy. And by the way, so does the Labour Party. The whole of every disastrous budget that Reeves has put together relies on capitalism. And by the way, you can't have socialism without capitalism because who pays for it? You have to make money for socialism to work. So you have to prop up the laziest in society. So you better have some capitalism around because otherwise you're going to have a really, really shit time.
Yeah, I was just going to say on Jemrick, some people have said this is what Tommy Robinson was doing 10 years ago, and now Jemrick's doing it. And that's probably true. But no, but Jemrick, he's a bit out, he's more out there, he's a bit more bold. I guess he knows he has to do something. They gave the leadership to Kemi bizarrely. And anyway, I still think he'll probably come back. Whether you could still vote Tory, though, after everything they've done is another question. We've done quite a lot of time. Maybe we'll squeeze in that other story because I've already talked about it and already
Sure.
been openly angry about it. We'll just squeeze in then the last story, which is Livia Tossici Bolt, who was given a 2-year conditional charge and was ordered to pay £20,000. And she basically just showed up with a sign in one of these areas you're not allowed to stand near an abortion clinic saying, "Here to talk if you want to." And all she was doing was just having conversations with people. It was a consensual conversation. She says it was just sort of open. She wasn't trying to push her views on them. Because, the caricature is there's people there throwing pig's blood at you and saying, like, how dare you be getting an abortion? But a lot of the people I know, and I sort of know some of the people who know the people doing it because they're defended by ADF, and I know people who work for that, including her own barrister, actually. A lot of them just showing up and saying they're either praying in their head or they're offering a conversation, but they're not in any way doing anything nasty. And she's been treated so shockingly that actually the White House is getting involved and saying, "What on earth are you doing?" We've heard Vance. Yes, there's an annoying element where we see in the signal chats how poorly they're talking about Europe and maybe Britain. There's an arrogance about some of the Trump administration, and you think, hang on, tone down the way you talk about us, maybe. And some of the people on Twitter and stuff, you think, shut up. And then you get other people replying, going, why are the British people putting up with this? As if they're just overthrowing governments every weekend. Like, it's so annoying. But there is also an element where the Trump administration is right, because this is an embarrassment. And the Trump administration have hinted that they want to know, what's going on with these kind of things, if we're going to get a trade deal, etc. Because I think it's completely legitimate. But it's 3 issues going on. That's why it's very contentious. One is abortion itself, which I think we have radical views on in this country. We're in line with Holland, which would give you an idea. Imagine when you're in line with Holland on how liberal your policy is. It's basically a sign that you've gone mental. We're far more extreme than France, Denmark, Italy, Spain. We have the 24-week rule. They all have 15, 17, etc., 12 and stuff. So we're extreme on abortion. Then you've got the element of American interference, which I understand people don't like. Then you've got the element of free expression and these buffer zones. And that's where I was getting so angry before, because I've seen all these replies justifying the buffer. The buffer zone is a stupid idea. You can't pray in your head in a bit of the street in England and Britain. Get lost. I mean, it's so ridiculous. People are like, no, it's the rule. But I understand it's because people want to protect the women, and maybe there's a good element to that at the heart of it. For some reason, they don't want to protect the unborn baby as much. That's interesting. But they go, okay, you can't pray in your head in these zones or have a sign or offer a consensual conversation. Completely absurd. Kelly J. Keane put it very well, but she was saying that abortion, we're expected to see it as at once and not a big deal, should be easy access, it's healthcare, you just go in and out, boom, not a big problem. At the same time, we're expected to see it as so traumatic that you can't have someone praying in their head anywhere near you. So which is it? I think that's a reasonable point. Is it traumatic or not? And, we sweep it under the carpet. If you know what is involved in the procedure, it's absolutely horrific. And it is killing a baby, in my opinion. But let's not go down that whole route. Let's just say, but, I'm not a nutter. I say, I'm a reasonable. I say, let's just look at our law and maybe get it more in line with Europe would be a nice thing. But even aside from the abortion issue, the free speech, free expression issue, it's madness that you can't stand near a zone. It's the law because of the buffer zone. The buffer zone is a stupid law. Paul.
Yeah, the buffalo is the buffalo, the buffers, the buffalo, the buffer zone is a stupid law. Now, the people that will say it's not will be supportive of all the things you're not supportive of. They all always forget with free speech it can work both ways. What if you and I demanded a buffer zone around women's changing rooms of 100 metres that no trans women / actual men could go near? There'd be uproar. They'd be like, you can't do that, you can't do that. Well, do you know what? That's our opinion. So it's a new law now, and anyone who's got a willy and tries to get into a women's changing room is going to be arrested.
Although actually, just to cut in quickly, a lot of the TERFs are very, very pro-choice, so they might be against that one, but for the buffer zone one. But anyway,
exactly. So so what you have to allow is two opinions to exist. Okay, opinion you agree with and opinion you don't agree with can exist in the same space. And what you do is you grow up and you accept that people have differing opinions, and you allow yourself some critical thinking, and you allow yourself some adult conversation on the subject and some debate, and you perhaps work policy through on that basis. Now, if people are chucking pig's blood at young women going to get an abortion, I don't agree with that. Okay, that in itself would probably be some form of criminal offence. But if a lady stood there saying, I'm here to talk if you want to, that is not a criminal offence, buffer zone or no buffer zone. If there is if a law is created based on a buffer zone to make that illegal, the law is horseshit. It's as simple as that. So that lady, who has no recourse now, by the way, has to pay £20,000, has a suspended sentence. So if she does kick off in any other way, is probably going to end up in prison with Lucy Connolly and will have to pay even more money. So I'm sure that £20,000 doesn't come too easy to her either. So she's been punished for standing there with a sign saying, this is not even praying, just sort of saying, I'm here if you want to talk. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with that. Now, if I was going to get an abortion, and why wouldn't I? Because I'm a woman. If I walked past that lady and she had the sign, that wouldn't change my mind. It might do, and it could do, and that's the point. So I shouldn't say it wouldn't change my mind. It might change my mind, and then a life could be saved, or a different path could be taken, or it might not. Or it might not, or you might just ignore it. It's very different to someone chucking pig's blood at you. Very, very different. We shouldn't conflate the two at all.
And I don't even know if that's a real example. That's in the back of my head, pig's blood. I don't know if that's actually happened. I sort of had it's in my head for some reason that people would chuck blood on people, but maybe they never did. But it's the most extreme example I could think of.
Yeah, no, it's not impossible, but it invokes this image, which we can believe is true. So my point still remains the same. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She was expressing her opinion very politely about something she believes deeply in. Like I say, if you want buffer zones for that, what would stop you having buffer zones for everything else? You could think of a million things, comedically and otherwise, of where you would have buffer zones. So where do you stop? So this is why we have to allow the opinions to exist together.
I'd like a lot of buffer zones, actually. People are so annoying and stupid. There's so many opinions where I just want them buffered into oblivion.
Yeah. Nothing would be able to exist if you had that, Nick. Nothing.
Yeah. Actually, when we win, I think maybe we'd put buffer zones on all these lefties. They're just buffered everywhere. They're not allowed to.
They just can't go anywhere.
Are you thinking a stupid thought in your head? Like, you're not allowed to pray in your head in certain streets in Scotland now. It's like, okay, are you thinking about communism in your head in this area?
Go back home.
You're near the cenotaph and you're thinking about communism. Get out. That's our buffer zone.
And you can be arrested.
Coming around.
Here's a suspended sentence and a 20 grand fine. Please don't think again.
All right, maybe we could think about that. But anyway, those are the stories. I mean, we went through them quickly. Those are just some stories that struck me this week. I think we dealt with them, and I think what we'll do is go. Yeah, we'll do peak woke for the hardcore fans over on nickdixon.net, where we're going to talk about Joan of Arc being non-binary and Britain's wokest council telling staff to take the white privilege test and a load of other stuff like that. There's some crackers in there. Although it's amazing that woke's still going in this country, but it is hanging on. And we'll do Ed Davey Watch as well. So it's always the funniest section behind the paywall where we get loose with the kind of illusory protection of the paywall. I say illusory because hope not hate still find their way behind it. But we do get very, very outrageous in that section, and Paul gets very racist. NickDixon.net for that. Go to Paul Cox Comedy for his Substack. Thank you very much for listening and watching on YouTube. And we'll see you again next week. Is there anything you would like to add, Paul?
No, just we won't. You won't be a Dixon and Cox
Oh,
next
yeah.
week, will it? It won't be. It'll
That's
be
right.
a Dixon and someone else, or just some dicks. You might just get pure dicks.
Yeah, sorry, Paul is away next week, like some sort of slacker, some sort of one of these one of these 50% that don't contribute aren't net tax contributors. He's
Yeah,
one of
it's
these
like
benefit scoundrels you've heard about.
far right holidays I'm going on. It's like Saga, and I get like a discount, and it's just white people, and we just we
He's
get
off
to
to
talk about all the
Poland
things
to
we
get
want to
some
talk
tips
about.
on the border policy.
Exactly, yeah.
Can you give me a tour of the border? Your wife and kid are like, Paul, do we have to do this? Like, no, I want to see how they're doing it. So
It's only
Paul's
4
off.
hours.
He's off on a far right package holiday. So we won't see him next week. So I don't know. I'm thinking about asking another commentator or doing it myself or not. Let's see. So we'll come up with something probably for next week. But Paul will be back in 2 weeks. Good. Thank you for reminding me, Paul. And we'll see you all for our bonus podcast as well and all our other content on nickdixon.net. Thank you very much. Goodbye.